The night is slowly closing, but my eyes are slowly opened, and I see that somewhere in you there is a good heart.
Well, I think it's important to talk to them is because, I think so many people have a stigma on mental health. They have a stigma on whether you were asking for help. People think it makes you less of a person. It makes you less of a man. And I think it's important just to show people that we all fall short of the glory of God. I think that's one thing I think people need to realize is that we all make mistakes. We all have problems. But the biggest problem is you don't get it taken care of.
My words of encouragement to teen girls that are suffering from eating disorders, self-harm, anything, is to get help. That's the most important thing that you can do for yourself, and it can change your life and potentially save your life.
If I could be on my little soapbox and help remove the stigma of mental health, if you had a bad limb or you had something that somebody can identify as a physical issue, they'd have no problem with it. And I think it's as severe and debilitating as anything.
It doesn't have to be something so extreme. No one has to be on a ledge in order to seek help or to help them. It's just there are ways of dealing with it that you can do, and just ask a professional or someone around you. And just speaking up is the hardest part.
Definitely something that is a very serious thing, and if you want your life to be better, I think that it's very important to talk to anybody, and maybe the first step is just to talk to a friend about it. If anything, baby steps, one thing at a time, talking to somebody who maybe you can kind of share some things with, and maybe probably they'll relate in some way. And then after that, I think it's really brave to go talk to somebody, but it's so important, and I think it it helped me a lot.
When they tell you this, you go, oh, this is great. So now this explains events in your life and how you handle them, but our society frowns on it, and they don't want their heroes to have these issues, but unfortunately I do.
God grants you the serenity to accept the things that you can't change and the courage to change the things that you can. And God, please give me the wisdom to know the difference between those two things.
You considered suicide and you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder or manic depression. What I'm so interested in is you went on and made a documentary about that, where you talked about, and other people talked about, even though you wanted to be well, even though this was crippling your life in some way, there was something about the creativity of that disorder.
Yes, I mean, bipolar disorder, I call this film The Secret Life of a Manic Depressive, and one has to be very, very straightforward about this. Manic depression, bipolar disorder is a very morbid condition. And the doctors here, they will be the first to say, this is not something to take lightly. It's something to be diagnosed. It's something, that it does cause, when I say morbid, I mean in the medical sense. It causes death, and it causes deeply unhealthy lifestyles, and deep unhappiness for the person inflicted, and really hugely for their families and those who love them. There comes a time when the blankness of future is so extreme, it is such a black wall of nothingness, not even of bad things. It's not like there's a cave full of monsters that you're afraid of entering the future. It is just nothingness. And it is just horrible.
For everyone lost in silence, there is redemption. For everyone lost in silence, for everyone missing peace, for every will that is broken, no matter how dark it may be, there is redemption. There is redemption.
We have a challenge in our country to end the marginalization of people who suffer from these illnesses. Because what we end up doing is adding insult to injury. So it's not enough that people are facing a biologically based illness, no different than any other illness, but they have to suffer the discrimination that accompanies those illnesses. I'm a very public face of recovery, and I'm in recovery today. I've been to inpatient treatment for addiction. I've been to outpatient treatment for depression and bipolar. I spent years parking my car 4 blocks away from my psychotherapist's office because I was ashamed to have anyone know that, yes, that was my car in front of the psychiatrist's office. So like everybody else, I was not only facing an illness, but I was facing the stigma. I love NAMI. I love every organization that tries to advance the cause of people who are suffering from mental illness. NAMI really understands that we not only have to advance treatment, but in order to do that, we have to end stigma. They are the preeminent organization in advocating for a new paradigm to treating people the same way we would expect to be treated for any other illness of the body.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 6983.
I was honored to be the sponsor of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act in Congress. We would not have passed parity had it not been for the advocacy of groups like NAMI, who mobilized their national network to get people to speak up against stigma, speak up against discrimination, and say we have to end the way people are being marginalized in our country because of their illness. NAMI's about kicking down the doors and opening up the light of day. We're all focused on this together, and we all have a vested interest in working together. It begins with people taking that first step, literally in a walk, but also figuratively in the change that takes place from that walk to change the world around them. These are Americans of all color, creed, gender, and religion and ethnicity. You know what? They have one thing in common. They're being marginalized because their illness occurs in the brain as opposed to any other organ of the body. That doesn't make any sense, and we have to change it. NAMI works on changing it, and I love NAMI for that.
The main goal of this conference is not to start a conversation. So many of you have spent decades waging long and lonely battles to be heard. Instead, it's about elevating that conversation to a national level and bringing mental illness out of the shadows. We want to let people living with mental health challenges know that they are not alone, and we've got to be making sure that we're committed to support those fellow Americans. Because struggling with a mental illness or caring for someone who does can be isolating. And I think everybody here who's experienced the issue in one way or another understands that. It begins to feel as if not only are you alone, but that you shouldn't burden others with the challenge. And the darkness, day in, day out, what some call a cloud that you just can't seem to escape, begins to close in. So we know that recovery is possible, we know help is available, and yet as a society we often think about mental health differently than other forms of health. You see commercials on TV about a whole array of physical health issues, some of them very personal.
Did you feel a greater responsibility, Bob, doing a film that David had so much personally invested in?
Oh, of course. I mean, I understand what he... But I don't like to get emotional, but I know exactly what he goes through.
You understood some of the same experiences that he's had with his son. So clearly this became an important cathartic experience for all of you, you know, a communal experience.
I mean, when I first showed him the screenplay in his home, you know, we all know people who have faced these challenges, and we've all been touched by these people, and we love these people, you know, and as he says in the movie, I want to do everything I can to help you get back on your feet, and there's nothing harder in life than when you can't.
"50 years ago, my uncle President Kennedy made a very powerful speech about the moral issue of his time, and that was civil rights. And he said, who amongst us would trade the color of their skin and be content with those who counsel patience and delay? Today that could easily be said for those of us, like myself, who suffer from a mental illness, but not just a medical issue, but a civil rights issue. Because the denial of medical treatment is really a civil rights issue. Because who amongst us would trade places with one of our returning veterans from Iraq or Afghanistan and be content with the counsels of patience and delay? Would be content with people referring to your illness as a, quote, invisible wound of war?
We need a national dialogue, and we need the president to use the bully pulpit to talk about this last area of attitudinal discrimination. So it existed according to race, creed, gender, sexual orientation. The pervasive discrimination against people with mental illness in this country is what we need to address, because if our attitudes continue to marginalize people and segregate them in a separate system, then we're not going to make the progress we need.
We need to be doing more so that we're looking at healthcare very broadly. Young people who may be in severe depression, may have feelings of suicide. Very great concern in this country. We need to make sure that they have someone that's able to reach out, understands what's happening, and can give them the help and support that they need, as well as their family. I think this film, Silver Linings Playbook, is an example of what we need to do, which is increase awareness.
That you have to have a strategy. I hate my illness and I want to control it. This is what I believe to be true. You have to do everything you can. And if you stay positive, you have a shot at a silver lining.
I'm here by accident. And I think if I could do one thing, it is to raise awareness, because I was ignorant before I did this movie. And I found many connections to this guy. I mean, for me, it felt like that it wasn't acting. It felt like I could understand that if life, you know, dealt a different set of cards to me, I can understand being in a situation that Pat found himself in. And then I was making connections that I wasn't even aware of. I wasn't even aware of one of my buddies, my whole life, is bipolar. And I wasn't even really aware of what he goes through. How ignorant of me. I wasn't even aware of my action, that I do walk down the street, and if someone seems, you know, I'll treat them differently. I wasn't aware of how ignorant and how scared I was to admit that we all have a connection and how important that is. And that's because we just want to be safe, and we don't want to go to those parts in ourselves. And I think that's the real key to this illness, is that it is something that we can all relate to. And it's hard to confront yourself. It's hard to confront actions that occur that we may not want to deal with. But if we have a dialogue about it, then we can then understand it and make change for ourselves.
We need prevention, and the only way we're going to get that is if we treat this as we would any other physical health issue. So people say, you know, you wouldn't deny people who have leukemia from needed treatments. You wouldn't deny people with diabetes from preventive services. But today, we treat mental health as if it's a stage 4 cancer and we only start at stage 4. We can intervene early and preempt and prevent those illnesses from becoming real pathologies that take people down in their lives.
If we do communicate, healing can occur, and humor can occur, and we can enjoy our lives. This guy isn't solved. His life isn't complete at the end of this movie. No, but he's communicated what he feels. He has a strategy, he has a structure, and he has a support system that goes way beyond his own delusion of what he thinks and how he's going to control his life. So hopefully today can be the beginning of that awareness and that action.
When I discovered that I was diagnosed with clinical depression, I felt almost euphoric because I had something to blame it on, that it wasn't my fault.
They tried to make me go to rehab.
I was diagnosed with clinical depression in 8th grade.
I suffer from depression.
I'm depressed.
Bipolar.
I'm paranoid, schizophrenic, suffered traumatic brain injury in Iraq.
ADHD.
Also post-traumatic stress disorder.
24-karat examples of mental disease that was controlling their life.
I kept cutting and I kept cutting more.
Alcoholic.
Pop top and drink another beer.
I shoplifted a lot.
Sticking a knife in and pus shooting across the room. And all I said was, well, I can't shoot up there anymore.
I also came to understand that there's a tremendous stigma surrounding any kind of brain disease.
Stigma comes a lot from fear.
I just didn't want, again, that stigma attached to my name.
People are afraid of something that's different.
We don't value psychiatric care. We don't value the treatment for mental illness the same way that we do other forms of illness.
This is a movie to show you what to do with the pain.
Clinical depression is disease. It's not a pick yourself up by the bootstraps and just tough it out. It's an illness.
Whether you're a movie actor,
Doing a drug,
or a brain surgeon,
5 different sexual partners,
or work at the CVS as a clerk,
cutting yourself.
we're all the same.
It's all the same.
Brain disease. I want to make a movie about this.